Bringing people and communities together on seclosounds.org.
Your listening station.
On the second birthday of my travel show, I'm talking package holiday and the history of package holidays. That's all coming up on the Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. Hello and welcome to the Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. Yes, this is a special birthday edition of the Guinn Travel Show. Its very first broadcast was the 30th of June 2012. I remember it well. It wasn't the best travel show in the world. I was so nervous, and I had a script timed to every second with music, so it was about 50-50 music chat. Well, I say chat. It was me reading my notes in a very monotonous, boring tone. If you can't get any sleep, check out the replays or the Mixcloud Guinn Travel Show on mixcloud.com. Download the very first travel show, and you'll be asleep within minutes after listening to that. So that was 2 years ago on the 30th of June. Things have changed a lot since then. Back then when the show originally started, it was a monthly show. We then went fortnightly, and now, as you know, we're weekly. And this is the 72nd show since that start. The first few, well, maybe the first year, were all live, recorded in the Seclo Sound studio. And then as the times changed, I'm now recording in my studio at home and putting this together, which gives me more flexibility in recording interviews and getting the show done. And sometimes to cut out the mistakes that I might make on a live show, although I do leave some in. And talking about mistakes, on the second show, it was the first one on my own, no engineer, no cover. It was terrible, it was really bad. To be honest, the first 5 minutes or so would have been excellent, and I think they're the best introduction I'd ever done. Except, I forgot to turn the microphone on. I was speaking to nobody. Nobody could hear me. And then the recorder packed up and didn't record the show anyway, so luckily the recording of that particular show does not exist. Because not only did I forget to turn the mic on, one of my interviews wouldn't play either, so I had to ad-lib for 20 minutes. Definitely car crash radio. But now I'm a bit better. I'm not quite so monotonous and monotone as I used to be back then 2 years ago. And I'm having more guests and I'm trying to get more information on. So hopefully you can definitely tell the difference over the last 2 years. To mark this special show, I'm doing the history of package holidays. How holidays started, the original tourists and travellers, going up to why the package travel regulations in 1992 came into existence, and what the future holds, because the way people book holidays over the last 10 years has changed so much that perhaps all the regulations that came out in 1992, most of them aren't relevant anymore, and people are falling under the radar when it comes to consumer protection. It's not all me going on and reading my history notes. I do have a guest too, Sean Tipton from ABTA, who's going to tell us how ABTA feel about the package travel regulations, Flight Plus, and what they would like to see in any future regulations when it comes to package travel. The weather in the UK is never reliable, so millions each year go away, exchanging the British cold and wet weather for something more tropical. This used to mean popping down to the high street travel agent to book a package holiday. Things have changed over the last few years, probably firstly with teletext offering unbeatable deals for those willing to read through pages and pages of prices, which were followed by a long conversation on a premium rate line, and why nobody figured out that the holidays were cheaper because the travel companies were making up the difference by having expensive phone lines, I'll never know. And secondly, the internet has also allowed holiday makers to bypass the travel agent and to book holidays direct with travel companies, hotels, airlines, and sometimes doing this you can save hundreds of pounds. So, with this new way of booking taken over, is there still room for a traditional package holiday? Way back in history, the British have traditionally been a nation of travellers, although not always for relaxation. On the whole, it's probably for war and empire building. But there were some tourists, and these tourists went on medieval religious pilgrimages, and some believe this religious trip gave us the term holiday as a derivative to holy day. Bringing a straw donkey back from Spain can also be traced back to these religious pilgrims, as they like to bring back souvenirs from their trips to remind them of holy places they had seen and the shrines they had encountered. A progression away from the religious reasons for travelling, a new form of journey started in the 16th century, and this was called the Grand Tour. Many wealthy families sent their children off to see the sounds and sights of the major European cities. This tour was seen as an essential educational experience, and when you think about it, grand tours are still happening today, except that instead of wealthy children travelling, the travellers are now backpackers, gap year students, and those who just need to escape their everyday working lives. The first dedicated travel company was Cox and Kings, which formed way back in 1758. Richard Cox was the regimental agent for the Foot Guards, and this company organised the payments, clothing and other travel arrangements for members of the armed forces to all parts of the British Empire. So, with all this history of travelling overseas, to be honest, I do find it a little bit disappointing to find that the first proper recognised organised tour was actually a 12-mile train journey. This trip was sold by a Mr. Thomas Cook in 1841. Yes, the same Thomas Cook who founded the travel company we all know today. Thomas Cook was a cabinet maker and a former Baptist preacher. He believed that alcohol and a lack of education were the causes of Victorian problems. I wonder if he would have started his travel company back then if he knew that one day Thomas Cook would be associated with Club 1830. Probably not, but that's just my opinion.
Gary Fitz here, every Monday, 10 o'clock. Coming up, we've got Eric and Ernie. Join me here on Seclo Sounds.
In your smile.
It's from 1975. Eric and Ernie were four...
Gary, it's not Eric and Ernie, it's Earl and Ernie, the Cape Brothers, Union Man.
Oh, I see. Gary Fitz here, every Monday, 10 o'clock.
Earl and Ernie.
You're listening to the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. Cook was walking from his home in Market Harbour to Leicester to attend a temperance meeting. While walking, he had a brainwave. He should use the railways to further his preferred form of social reform. Once at the meeting, Cook suggested that a special train be engaged to carry the temperance supporters of Leicester to a meeting in Loughborough, around 12 miles away. After receiving the backing of his group, Cook contacted the Midland Railway Company, and on the 5th of July 1841, around 500 passengers travelled to Loughborough in open carriages, there and back for a shilling. Of course, there had been railway excursions before, but this first trip included entrance to an entertainment held on private grounds, the train tickets, and food for the rail journey. Over the next 3 years, Cook organised trips for temperance societies and Sunday schools. The first commercial trip was in 1845, which was a trip to Liverpool. As well as being more involved than the previous trips, Cook also produced a booklet which can be regarded as the great-great-great-great-grandfather of the travel brochures we see today. From this small tour, Thomas Cook and Son grew to become one of the largest and most well-known travel companies in the UK. The company grew as Cook saw the potential of a convenient, off-the-peg holiday product, which included everything for one price. He later went on to organise packages inclusive of accommodation for the Great Exhibition, even, I always struggle with that word, and then pioneered package holidays in both Britain and in Europe. Victorian Britain saw this new industry develop due to the increasing size of the middle classes, and also the increase in their disposable income. Only middle and upper classes could take the time off work and afford to pay for travel and boarding. The British were now travelling numbers overseas, but this time it was for peaceful reasons and not for war. This new source of income was welcome and can be seen by the foreign place names that contain English words or references to the British traveller. The working classes were still staying in the UK, with day trips to coastal resorts either by train or, as in the case of Londoners, by boat along the Thames to such places such as Southend. These day trips, the numbers of them, increased after 1871 due to the Bank Holiday Act of that year. Most workers only had Sunday, Christmas Day and Good Friday off. This new act included for workers, in England anyway, Easter Monday, Whit Monday, Boxing Day and the first Monday in August. It wasn't until the Annual Holiday Bill in 1936 that having a paid holiday became a statutory right. Although this didn't have much of an effect on overseas travels, it did see a growth in holiday camps in the UK, such as Butlins. You're listening to the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. On this special birthday show, I'm talking about package holidays, the history of travelling. A few months ago, I finished off talking about the early days of travel, and including the time when people actually got paid holiday. It was only a week, but it was still more than they had before. I'm now going to start talking about the history of package travel as we would recognise it nowadays, with the first ever chartered package holiday put together in 1950. Until the 1950s, most travel overseas was either by rail and or coaches. This changed thanks to holiday pioneers such as Vladimir Routes, who was a co-founder of the Horizon Holiday Group. I'll probably pronounce Routes wrong. As you know, dear listener, I'm not very good at pronouncing words. But anyway, the surname is spelt Raitz. This company, set up by Routes, started the first mass package holidays with charter flights. The first were from Gatwick to Corsica in 1950, and this later grew to include Mallorca, Lourdes, Costa Brava and Sardinia. Raitz, whatever, was a Russian whose family left the Soviet Union and finally settled in England. He was on his own holiday in Corsica in 1949, when he was asked by a local dignitary to encourage more British to visit the following year. He calculated that he could charter an aircraft and provide a 2-week holiday in Corsica for less than £35 per person. And please bear in mind that back then the average wage in the UK in 1950 was just over £100 a year. This didn't happen as fast as he would have hoped due to red tape. Age-old story. He only got permission to run the holiday after convincing the Ministry of Civil Aviation that the flights would only be for students and teachers. The holiday included the return flights, a tent, local wines and 2 meals containing meat a day. And the price in the end was just £32.10. So for roughly a third of the average annual income for the year, it was still a bargain though, because when you compare it to flight prices only by some of the big boys back then, a return flight from London to Nice was nearly twice the price of this 2-week holiday. It wasn't a luxurious holiday, and the camping facilities were actually left over from the construction of the airport by the US Navy. The flight also had a refuelling stop in Lyon, and the flying time was 6 hours. So the package industry, as we would recognise it today, had started, although there was more help needed from governments to aid the increase of the number of available holidays. This came from Montreal in June 1954, when amendments were made to the Convention of International Civil Aviation, which originally was put together in Chicago. This convention back in Chicago established the International Civil Aviation Organization, called ICAO, and it's a specialised agency of the United Nations, and it's charged with coordinating and regulating international air travel. The convention established rules of airspace, aircraft registration and safety, the details of the rights of the signatories in relation to air travel as well. The convention also exempts air fuels from tax. But put it more simply, they're the ones who decided on the liquids rule that has upset so many passengers nowadays each year because of their expensive perfume and makeup, and sometimes drink gets pulled away by the security staff at UK airports. Apparently, although I've not been able to check this out properly because I really don't understand the legal speak, the amendments in Montreal were very liberal to Spain, which started the mass tourism market there, really. But as I said, I've not been able to figure out how these amendments have managed to equate to getting all those high-rise hotels on the Spanish costas.
This is Seclo Sounds. Join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. for 1 hour in the company of Harry and Edna on the Wireless, exploring all aspects of the vintage scene and playing tip-top gramophone tunes. Harry and Edna on the Wireless, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. on seclosounds.org. Jolly good.
My name's Teresa Kelleher. Join me on Seclo Sounds every Wednesday at 8 p.m. for my show Inspired by Jazz. Each week I'll take you on a journey as I feature the music, the maestros and the melodies. That's Inspired by Jazz with me, Teresa, every Wednesday at 8 p.m. on Seclo Sounds.
You're listening to the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. This is the second birthday edition of the Travel Show, and I'm talking about the history of package holidays and also how package holiday regulations should change in the future to allow for the various different booking methods that are available now to the UK holiday maker. I've spoken about the history of travel and people going over for religious reasons and the Grand Tour. And package holidays did start to really become popular over the 1960s, but it all came to a head. I'm now going to start talking about the problems that hit the travel industry in the 1970s. The cheap package holidays became more and more popular during the 1960s, and airports around the UK were offering flights to somewhere in the sun. Although this rise did come to a decline in the 1970s due to many factors, which meant that the people's disposable income was reduced, and also the oil price had increased significantly. And this came to a head in 1974 when Courtline, which had actually taken over the Horizon Holiday Group, collapsed. This left nearly 40,000 holiday makers stranded in their resorts, and around about 100,000 people faced losing their deposits. There was enough money to get people back home, so they weren't really stranded, but there wasn't enough available to return all the deposits. This did see angry scenes at the London offices of another Courtline brand called Clarksons. Clarksons was one of the first travel companies to concentrate on price, and this tactic of piling high and selling cheap had seen passenger growth from 4,000 in 1964 to 1.1 million in 1973. According to Flight International magazine, they estimated that in the 5 years before the collapse, 8 million holidays had averaged £1 below cost. The magazine went on to report that the marketing of airline seats with Med hotels had given millions of ordinary people holidays once only available to the privileged, and that the collapse was the consequence of continuing to see selling £25 flights for £20 or less. And this was compounded by high inflation, a sinking pound, as I mentioned, the fuel oil going up doubled, and coups in Portugal, Cyprus and Greece. And of course, if you're old enough to remember back then, or maybe it did in history. Around this time it was a 3-day week as well. Looking at the way travel is sold today, it appears that travel companies have not learnt from the past. However, the Labour government at the time, probably mindful of the general election coming, pledged that everyone would get their money back. Clarksons did hold Air Travel Organisers Licensing, or ATOL, which was used to pay to get the stranded holidaymakers home. This was first introduced in 1973, so the timing was excellent, after a number of travel failures had left people stranded. The UK government realised that consumers required protection should firms in the unregulated travel sector fall into difficulties. This scheme was designed to cover charter flights and package holidays. Before this legal requirement, most consumer protection was voluntary. The Federation of Tour Operators introduced a bonding scheme in 1970, which meant that members had to hold bonds for at least 5% of their annual turnover, and then ABTA started a similar scheme in 1972. However, more high-profile collapses of airlines and travel companies in Europe, as well as in the UK, meant that more protection through regulations was required. Consumers didn't just need protecting against collapse, sharp practices were also catching holidaymakers out. So this change arrived in the form of the Package Travel Directive in 1990. This directive was developed by the European Economic Community to offer consumer protection to holidaymakers in all member states. It was to do much more than to just protect someone against the collapse of the travel company. It covered nearly every aspect of the buying process. And this directive became law in the UK with the Package Travel Regulations in 1992. You're listening to the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. The Package Travel Regulations in 1992 was a major game changer in the way that holidays were sold in the UK. I could read through all the various regulations, which would be very useful if you can't sleep, but basically they meant that by law you have the right to expect the holiday that you booked and paid for. Some of the important things to remember are: if the holiday doesn't match the description given in the booking paperwork, you may have a claim against the tour operator for compensation. The provider of the package holiday is liable for all the services, car hire, accommodation, flights, etc., as long as they were part of the package the tour operator arranged for you. Of course, you need to know what a package holiday is, and Regulation 2-1 says that a package is the pre-arranged combination of at least two of the following components, and these components are transport, accommodation, or other tourist services not ancillary to transport or accommodation and accounting for a significant proportion of the package. Not all travel arrangements are actually packages, however, and the ones that aren't are business travel arrangements, conference arrangements, educational weekends and school trips. Package holidays could also include holidays where the accommodation and the flight were supplied by two different suppliers but organised or put together by a separate person or company. This was easy to follow and to understand during the 1990s and the early 2000s, but holiday booking methods have changed. The holiday market has changed considerably actually, and the rise in online booking means that many people now book components of their holidays separately, although it is possible that some travellers believe they have a package holiday, when actually they don't. In the early days of internet booking, there were stories of people arriving at the destination airport and wondering where their bus was. Well, they didn't book it, that's why it's not there. And also, due to airline collapses, ash clouds, adverse weather and other causes, travellers have been left out of pocket as they decided to do all the bookings themselves and didn't realise how little protection this offered. Others were also caught out by travel firms trying to gain customers by being as cheap as possible and use techniques to bypass the regulations and thereby saving money, as providing consumer protection is actually very expensive. Of course, media stories of people losing holiday money did give a mini boost to the traditional package holiday providers for a short time. However, the laws now need updating to allow for the internet booking. We're still waiting for changes to the package travel regulations, and there'll be more about that on later. But there has been a change to the atoll scheme. As I mentioned, this first came in 1973. In simple terms, there were two types of travel companies: those that applied the atoll rules to every booking, and those who used workarounds to save the cost involved in providing atoll cover. A high-profile case involving the Civil Aviation Authority, or the CAA, who actually run the atoll scheme, and they took Travel Republic to court. This online travel company was selling flights, accommodation and travel extras, but technically in a way that they did not form a package holiday. The CAA insisted that Travel Republic's selling method did mean that package holidays were being sold, and therefore an atoll was required. To a customer, it might have been very difficult to tell that a Travel Republic holiday was not a proper package holiday, unless of course they actually took the time to read and understand the terms and conditions. But how many people actually do that? However, Travel Republic did provide a consumer protection scheme of their own. Anyway, the upshot was that the CAA lost. Lots of major travel companies that were holding atolls got upset with the CAA, and changes had to be made to the scheme. In hindsight, perhaps it would have been better if the CAA had just spent all the time they invested in the court case into actually getting a new scheme up and running. But there we go, that's just my view. Of course, putting this scheme together, there were delays, consultation, training, explaining the new scheme, and of course last minute changes. For example, I attended a CAA training session. I understood just about everything, and then when I was totally confused when the scheme went live, as it didn't match the training I'd already received. You can contact us or just keep up to date with travel news at facebook.com/John Guinn Travel Show.
This is Seclo Sounds, your community radio station. If you'd like to volunteer some of your time and skills with Seclo Sounds, send an email to volunteers@seclosounds.org and let us know how you would like to be involved. MK Flyers Online, the fast and simple way to find any kind of business or service locally. Find us at mkflyersonline.co.uk or download the MK Flyers mobile app from your app store. MK Flyers Online proudly supports Seclo Sounds, community radio for Milton Keynes.
John Guinn Travel Show. Checking it out before you check in on seclosounds.org. The tune you just heard was Sunshine on Charlotte, and it was my original theme tune on the very first show 2 years ago. Even now, listening to it again, I still feel a bit nervous. Not quite as nervous as I was when I went live for the very first time on that Saturday afternoon. But I don't play it anymore. People didn't like it. I had a little competition about a year ago to find new theme tunes, but I've changed again. Who knows what I'll be playing in another 2 years' time, and whether I still feel a little bit nervous when I hear that track being played. So I chose it because it's the only thing I really had in my CD collection. The music would be bland enough and suitable enough to introduce a travel show. Before the jingles and the Sunshine on Charlotte track, I was talking about the new atoll regulations. I ended up by saying how I felt confused after being trained on it, and then when it came live, there were things I understood which were no longer covered, such as the wonders of new regulations and law. I'm now going to start talking about the new atoll regulations and how they protect the UK-based travel consumer. So anyhow, from April 2012, the new atoll now covers all overseas air holidays where a flight and accommodation have been booked together. It also covers some flights booked separately, and it also applies to other circumstances too. The highlight of this new scheme are: a Flight Plus exists when a flight is sold with overseas accommodation and or car hire. The flight and accommodation and or car hire must be requested on the same day or within 1 day of each other, but it does not matter what the customer asks for first. So the travel company has to be on the ball here. If somebody comes in, books a hotel, and then comes back the next day to book a flight, they have to try and match the hotel booking with the flight booking. And hopefully it's under the same name. It's not, say, a boyfriend booking the hotel, then a girlfriend booking the flights, because it's the same holiday, so they have to be on the ball. This trip must be over 24 hours in duration and include an overnight stay. The flight must have its outbound leg departing from the UK, except where the arrangement includes travel departing from the UK by another method, such as a ferry, coach or rail, and a flight into the UK. There was talk about people travelling to Amsterdam and stuff to avoid certain regulations because the flights are cheaper from there, but it really doesn't make much difference. You might as well just start off in the UK. A flight that begins and ends in the UK, so Luton Airport to Glasgow, does not require an atoll. Other tourist services sold in connection with the Flight Plus that form a significant part of the trip must also be included in the Flight Plus if those services are requested at the same time or within 1 day of the request for the flight. If a business sells another atoll holder's flight exclusive package and then adds separate overseas car hire or accommodation, this forms a Flight Plus and the business must protect the Flight Plus under its own atoll. So what this means is, if you go to a high street travel agent and you book a Thomas Cook holiday, but then you decide the Thomas Cook was too expensive for the car hire, and the travel agent came up with car hire from Holiday Autos and put that together, that travel company would now have to have its own atoll to cover your package, and they're responsible. Something to look out for. The obligations of a Flight Plus arranger are that they have obligations to the customers if a supplier fails. The Flight Plus arranger will be required to replace that part of the trip at no extra cost to the consumer, or to provide a refund for the whole trip. This obligation seems fair, and it kind of covers the similar to the package travel regulations. But what does supplier fails mean? Does it mean that the company closes down, or that it fails to deliver what was booked? If a part of the trip gets cancelled, then some companies would honour the booking as if it is a package holiday, and others will not. So this is another reason to read and understand the terms and conditions of the booking. So you may find that if you have a Flight Plus atoll holiday and the flight gets cancelled, say for strikes in France, the air control people, you may find that your company who sold you an atoll Flight Plus holiday will require you to pay for replacement flights out of your own pocket, and then you'll get your refund from the cancelled flights from the airlines. With a package holiday, that should not happen. So every booking under the new scheme has to produce a certificate. This was originally yellow, so as it stood out in the paperwork. However, I believe this isn't the case anymore, and you now can get it in black and white. This yellow certificate was an extra expense to travel companies. Do they have another printer just with yellow paper in? Or do they just use all the yellow ink to produce the certificate? I didn't meet anybody who thought it was a good idea. And the certificate should be taken with the passengers when they go away, as it has all the contact details and information needed should they need to make a claim before they come home. So in theory, more travellers should now be protected, but there is a group of holiday makers who aren't. And these are the ones who decide to book flights directly with the airline. So on any given flight, you could have two people sit next to each other. One booked the flight for a travel agent and has ATOL cover, and the person next to him booked direct with the airline, and they don't. The airline successfully campaigned through the consultation period for the ATOL changes that they couldn't afford it, and it would make them uncompetitive. I don't see why this was the case, as travel companies just add the £2.50, or whatever the fee is now, to the cost of the holiday. The airlines could have done that as well, I suppose. But anyway, they're not covered. The new ATOL has included more companies, as I mentioned. However, there are still companies out there who can escape this regulations. Companies such as Virtual Personal Assistants, or VPAs, who can use their client's credit card to book direct with various holiday suppliers. So the whole trip's put together without an ATOL. Travel agents can't use this method to escape the ATOL because they make travel available, according to a person from the CAA I interviewed last year. So they cannot bypass the process by saying they're acting on behalf of the customer and using the customer's credit card. And also there are travel companies, proper travel companies that make travel available, who can provide travel arrangements to UK holiday makers without an ATOL. And these are travel companies that are based in other European states. Under EU laws, companies can sell without restriction to consumers in other member states, as I mentioned. Probably the highest profile example of this is Low Cost Holidays, who moved to Mallorca in November in 2013. The company does claim that bookings are protected voluntarily under the Spanish Financial Protection Scheme. However, this doesn't satisfy the CAA's legal view that even if the bookings are accepted under the Spanish scheme, the value of protection offered is extremely limited and doesn't compare to that offered by UK travel companies. When the move was announced, Paul Evans, the CEO of Low Cost Holidays, did say that under EU Package Travel Directive, all their customers will benefit from enhanced and full package travel protection under Spanish law, consistent with the EU Package Travel regulations. If you go to the website, you will see that there are two logos that lots of other online bookers have. One is the ABTA badge and the other is the ATOL logo. Maybe the absence of these would put some people off. There is a menu link to a page on the Low Cost Holidays website for the holiday protection, but to be perfectly honest, it doesn't say a lot, and it has another link on it which appears to be a badly scanned version of the Spanish license. But hopefully, if you scroll down far enough, you'll see that some of this is actually in English. Also, despite what some travel trade is saying about this and Low Cost Holidays moving, it didn't stop it being a finalist in a UK Travel Trades magazine's annual awards in the accommodation only category. So who is right? Who is to say? Definitely not me, and I'm sure it'll all be sorted out in the end, either by law or by a company collapsing and leaving passengers stranded overseas.
Happy Radio.
Hi, this is Russell Hearn. Join me Fridays at 12 for a little pick-me-up. I'll be playing the music that stirs those warm memories and takes you to a special time and place. And Minnie's here with her choice of fun apps for your phone too. So for a lighter look at life and some songs you'll never forget, tune in to seclosounds.org for some happy radio.
You can contact us or just keep up to date with travel news at facebook.com/John Guinn Travel Show. I'm old enough to remember That's Life on BBC TV back in the 1980s. For those of you who weren't around at the time, this was a consumer watch programme, a bit like Watchdog, but more fluffy, and it had a few songs and dances and funny type features such as a dog that can say walls. Anyway, it seemed that every week, from my memory of the time, that there was somebody who had a complaint about their holiday. And the story about the holiday and the advice given always ended with Esther Ranton saying, "Remember, always book with an ABTA member." Oh, I'm turning into a poet. So, what is ABTA's view on the current consumer protection for holidaymakers? I spoke to their spokesperson, Sean Tipton, to find out. Sean, the package holiday regulations 1992, do they still work?
Well, the package travel regulations, they came in 1992, quite right. It's quite some time ago now, so what's over 20 years ago. Now, back in the 1990s, early 90s, the kind of holidays we took were rather different. The vast majority of foreign holidays were actually package holidays. Mm-hmm. So the package travel regulations very specifically protected the vast majority of holidaymakers within the European Union. So they're a very good thing. Before that, there were kind of ad hoc regulations to protect people. For example, we had quite strict ones in the UK, but there was nothing that was quite as wide-ranging as the package travel regulations. So they were a very good thing. However, what's changed since then? Well, simply this. Back in 1992, the majority of foreign holidays were packages. Now in 2014, only about 45% of foreign holidays are packages, and that's obviously, mostly because of the internet. It's very much changed the way people book their holidays and the kind of holidays they take. So it's very clear that, regulations that are intended to make sure that the majority of holidaymakers in the EU have travel protected needed updating, and that's what the European Union has been working on for at least 3 or 4 years now.
So you say that these regulations need updating. What in particular is missing, and do ABTA members cover this anyway as being part of an ABTA?
Well, I think the most important thing about the package travel regulations is partly what they're called the package travel regulations. Mm-hmm. Now, the issue there is that legally speaking, a package is defined as selling a holiday which involves more than one element, and that normally means flights plus accommodation. As long as it's all sold at an inclusive price, that's a classic package. However, what's changed since then, since 1992, is that there are a lot of holidays sold which look like packages. For example, you go onto an airline's website, you book a flight with them, you then click through from there to another website and book a hotel. Now, that is legally not a package, but from a consumer's perspective, it's what's the difference, really. But it's not a package, so it does not have to be financially protected, and it isn't. Now, this is a pretty massive anomaly, and we're talking about millions of people a year who travel on those kind of bookings where they don't have financial protection behind them. And that's one thing that ABTA has been saying about the package travel regulations, because the intention was to modernise them, to reflect the changing market, and to make sure that, once more, the majority of people booking holidays in, foreign holidays within the European Union would be protected. So that's one massive area that needs to be addressed. The other area, I suppose, would be just about the fact they're called the package travel regulations. So they only talk about package holidays. Now, if you were to, let's say, go directly to an airline, and that's all you're booking, just a single element, that's, again, it's not a package. So even with the review of the directive, that wouldn't be covered. So that's a very big area where there is no financial protection. In terms of what ABTA does, many of our members do actually offer financial protection for things that aren't packages. For example, if you book accommodation only with an ABTA member, it's not a legal requirement to offer financial protection, but many of them will do it. So yeah, there are quite a few areas whereby, it's not a classic package, it's not going to be covered by the current directive or even the new one, that ABTA members will choose to cover it, yes.
Okay. If ABTA were left to come up with their own regulations, is it easy? Could you put it simply what ABTA would like to see in them?
Well, I think the main thing about it, we want to see two things. First of all, to make sure that more, that the revised regulation does what they said they wanted to do, which is to reflect, how people book their holidays now. And that means including all kinds of potential things that look like packages to make sure that they are treated as packages. As I said, like going to an airline, booking a ticket with them, then sending you off to another website to book a hotel. That should be covered. It makes no sense that it isn't, and it's unfair. And also, so that's good for consumers if all that's brought in. But secondly, it's also fair because there's quite a significant financial implication for tour operators who provide packages to provide this financial protection. It's not cheap. And the other side of it as well is that the package travel regulations state that these companies are also responsible if anything goes wrong with the holiday. Now that's quite, if you think it through, that what that means is, if there's an accident in a hotel that you've booked through them as part of a package, it's their responsibility, not the hotels, and you can take it up with them. And that means they will go out of their way, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's quite expensive though, that they will go out of their way to make sure that the kind of hotels and other services they're providing are properly looked after and are safe as far as is possible. Whereas companies who, are not selling classic packages, they don't have that legal obligation, so they're much less likely to do those checks. So that's unfair, A, to the tour operators, but it's also not good for consumers either, because, in some instances they'll be travelling on holidays where those kind of extra checks won't necessarily have been done, because the companies know that they're not legally responsible if something goes wrong. So that's not good for consumers, and it's not good for the tour operators who act at a commercial disadvantage because it costs them money to do these things.
Going back to where some people will think they got a package when they haven't, I believe, I could be wrong on this, that a Flight Plus atoll gives the impression that it's a package holiday, but it not necessarily is. Is that true?
It's true. Yes, it is, and it isn't. Basically, Flight Plus. Explain what that is very quickly. If you book a flight through a travel agent, and then they let's say offer, or you ask them to book you a hotel, and they then go and book it through another company. Now that isn't necessarily legally a package. It's a thing called a Flight Plus. However, you're quite right to remember the public's perspective. It looks like one, doesn't it? It's just legally it isn't. So what changed 2 or 3 years ago was that it became a requirement for travel agents who were doing that, even if it's not a classic package, they had to protect it financially. They had to offer that financial protection. So it's kind of halfway house. What's different though with Flight Plus, because it's not legally a package, is that those agents are not responsible if something goes wrong with the holiday. There's not, that they don't have that extra level of obligation that a classic tour operator does, but they do have to offer financial protection. So that's quite a significant move. I think the estimates of the time, that meant that something like 6 million people a year would have an extra level of financial protection. So it offers part of the protection of package in terms of looking after your money, but they don't have the obligation, as I said, if something goes wrong. So it's a bit of both, really. But that's something that the new package travel directive will be looking at, as whether that would be treated as a classic package, just like the ones that currently are.
You said about the financial protection with a Flight Plus atoll. Which bit of the holiday is actually covered?
The lot, basically. The whole thing, if the Flight Plus travel agent, atoll holder you're dealing with, if they go out of business, you're protected. If, let's say, one of the companies they use, the airline or the accommodation-only supply goes out of business, you're protected, because it would be their responsibility, the Flight Plus company, to give you your money back. So that kind of area, it's about financial protection if they or one of the companies they use goes out of business. It means your money is safe. So that's what Flight Plus will do. That's quite a significant level of cover.
It is. We just had the strikes in France, which have meant some flight cancellations in the UK. Is there a different level of protection for those who had a proper package holiday compared to those who had a Flight Plus trip?
No, there wouldn't be any difference because of the fact that if you have a classic package, let's start with that straight away. If you have a classic package booked, then the tour operator would be responsible to give you a full refund of the full cost of the package. Now, on Flight Plus, I think, to be fair, I don't think they necessarily would have to do that, but they certainly would go out and arrange to get you alternative flights as much as possible. So it's not quite the same. But Flight Plus, as I said, primarily is to do with the failure of a company rather than the cancellation of a service. So it's not quite as strong. But however, change it around a bit. if you haven't booked a classic package or you haven't booked through a Flight Plus agent, if you've just gone direct to an airline, and that's the majority of people would actually be doing that in a situation like this. We dealt with quite a few cases where the flight has been cancelled, but they booked their accommodation directly with a hotel or through an accommodation-only website, and they couldn't travel, obviously, and they were hit with a cancellation charge for not losing the accommodation. So I think that's the area where people are more at risk, where they're booking directly through airlines or through agents or tour operators.
Talking more about ABTA, can you just remind us about how ABTA protects the travelling consumer?
Well, ABTA, we're called ABTA, the Travel Association. I think people probably still better know us as the Association of British Travel Agents. We changed our name a few years ago, but and we've been going since 1950, and what do we do? Well, first of all, our members, in many cases, offer financial protection to customers, and that's, we talk about things like the package travel regulations, but the regulations make that requirement, but there's different ways you can offer the protection. One of the ways is, for example, is doing it through us. The other way is through Atoll, for example. But as an example of the kind of companies that purely protect their customers through ABTA, most of the major cruise companies are ABTA members. So we hold something like £3.5 billion worth of bonds, which are forms of insurance to cover people if the company goes out of business. That's that side of it. We don't protect absolutely everything. There are some areas where it's not a legal requirement to offer financial protection, such as if you sell accommodation only. Now, in that case, it's voluntary for our members whether they do or not, but many of them will. For example, we had a company that went out of business last month, sold precisely that. They did offer financial protection, and we're going to pay out around about £1 million to consumers who booked accommodation only through them. So yes, we don't always do so, but companies will make that clear. But when we do, as you see there, it can be quite significant, the level of cover. The other thing we do, we have a consumer affairs department, which is purely there to help customers who have a complaint or a problem with an ABTA member. They'll help them before they've been on holiday, and they'll help them after they've been on holiday as well. And we also have an arbitration scheme, which is a cheap and fast alternative to going to court if you've got a really bad problem with a company you haven't been able to sort it out with them. And also, we have a code of conduct, which is very strict, and the point of that code of conduct, all our members have to follow it. Some of them don't always like doing it, but regardless, they have to. And it's meant to ensure that basically that problems don't occur in the first place. And if they do, that they have very strict guidelines on how they're supposed to deal with customers to sort the problem out. So that has been going for a number of years. I remember the Office of Fair Trading looked at it a few years ago and said it was a model for other industries to look at. So yeah, those are the main things we do for consumers.
So it's worthwhile looking for an ABTA member then.
Indeed, yeah.
How can we find out more about your code of conduct and other stuff, ABTA?
The best place to find out information about ABTA is on our website, abta.com. It's been revamped and looked at in a lot of detail. It used to be maybe not quite so consumer friendly. It certainly is now, and we've also tried to, quite apart from saying what ABTA does, if you've got a problem, etc., it also gives out a great range of information about any kind of travel query you might happen to have, like what's your rights are if your flight's delayed, where do you need to get a visa for, what kind of health requirements are there, for different countries, and also just general more kind of fluffy things really about suggestions about, if you fancy going on holiday in March, where'd be a good place to look, go to, which, where's going to be nice weather, that kind of thing. So, but anyway, it's pretty much all you need to know about travel is on the website, so it's abta.com.
Okay, thanks Sean, thanks for your time.
All right, John.
You're listening to the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. So, this is the end of the second birthday edition of the Travel Show. I've talked about the history of package travel, consumer protection, the changes that the Civil Aviation Authority made when they updated their Atoll scheme. But what about the future? Obviously, we've heard that the package regulations of 1992 are out of date and changes need to be made. The EU is looking into this, and in March this year, a new package travel directive was passed by the European Parliament. And it's going to look into new things. Some of the most major parts of it are that a travel agent or the retailer can be held responsible for the package holiday as well as the organiser. So if you've got a problem with your trip, you can go back to the travel agent to talk about it, whereas at the moment the travel agent can go, well, nothing to do with me, I'm just acting on behalf of this company, you need to have a go with them. With this, it looks like you better have a go at both. If a transport provider, such as an airline, you book the ticket, and then they say, would you like a hotel? And you click on a link and you go to another website to book the hotel. If the airline passes on your contact details, then they should provide insolvency cover for the transaction. If they don't, and you have to put your details in again, then they don't have to provide the insolvency cover. Lots of people are being confused about this when they book on airlines. They think they're booking a package holiday, putting it together just like an online travel agent, and they're really not. Well, hopefully this will cover that and clear that up, make it easier for people to understand. And also, there's a little bit there about increasing the price. You may not know this, but when you've booked a holiday and you paid for it in full, the organiser can come back to you at the moment and say, oh, got our figures wrong, we need to charge you more. And they can do that to you up until a certain amount, and then they have to offer you the chance to cancel the booking and get your money back. They're saying if the costs go over 3%, then the organiser can come back to you for the extra increase. And these extra increases are things such as departure taxes, fuel taxes, currency fluctuations. At the moment, I think it's 10%. If the price goes more than 10%, then the passenger can say, oh, no, I don't want this holiday anymore, give me my money back. And the new directive is going to put this limit at 8%, so it's more in the consumer's favour. But who knows what will come out of this by the end of all the legal faffing about. As I said before, I went on a training course for the new Flight Plus, but when it actually came out, some of the stuff I knew and understood was no longer relevant. They changed it. So we'll have to wait and see over the next year or two. If you've had problems with package holidays, please share your experience at facebook.com/John Guinn Travel Show. If you think you've been covered and you haven't, say you've bought a Flight Plus and there's been an airline strike and you couldn't fly, what happened? Likewise, if a company went above and beyond to look after you with a holiday, please name names. Tell us who the good guys are when it comes to booking holidays, and we'll be allowed to use them instead of some of the others. Also, if you'd like, please share with me your own beliefs of what should be in consumer protection when it comes to booking holidays. Facebook.com/John Guinn Travel Show. So, the end of the second birthday edition of the show. I hope that you found all this history and the information about what you are covered for and what you're not useful. Hopefully it would save you some money in the future when you come to book a travel of some sort. And who knows what I'll be talking about in 2 years' time when I'm 4 years old. But whatever it is, you can be sure that on the John Guinn Travel Show, I'll be checking it out before you check in.
MK Pulse proudly sponsors Seclo Sounds. MK Pulse is Milton Keynes' local magazine, bringing helpful information on food, health, fashion, money, travel, culture, and much more to 66,000 readers every month. Plus news, views, and what's on from around the city. If it's happening in Milton Keynes, it's in MK Pulse, and it's available online at www.mkpulse.co.uk. MK Pulse and Seclo Sounds, the heart and soul of the city.